Okay, good morning, everyone. It's Heather Bradley. If we haven't yet had a chance to meet, I'm the Director of the Center for Nonprofit Resources. I'm so glad that you could join us today. We are here today with Beth Short and Abby Jacobs of the Attorney General's Office. It's always a great time when Beth and Abby come to town, this time obviously virtually. They're going to spend time with you going through the charitable board member roles and responsibilities. And I love the tagline that they have, minding the business while changing the world. So I know that you are going to learn a lot. If you have questions or you want to share resources, or if Beth or Abby want to share resources, we'll be using the chat box. I can take care of some other things later on, but I don't want to stand between you and Beth and Abby. So Beth, if you'd like to take it away. Oh, one other thing, we're recording, just so you know. And that is going right now. You'll see that in the upper left-hand corner, and we will be broadcasting a replay. Sorry, go ahead, Beth.
Hi, everybody. We were having I was having technical difficulties getting started here today, and it's been that kind of week for me. 2 days ago, I woke up, I had a flat tire on my car, and then my laptop apparently was trying to commit suicide because it crashed 2 times and like took everything down with it. And then I have a program on my phone to access my emails at work, which also crashed, which meant I was totally, I was unconnected and feeling awful because I need to be in connection with people. So thanks for being here today. I so wish that I was up in Toledo with you all in person. This is a long time to be together in a Zoom meeting, and I am guessing some people are already tired of Zoom meetings. I hope that we could use the chat room to could you share a little bit about yourself and what group you might be with or what organizations? And I will share a little bit about myself. So I work in the Attorney General's office, and I've been there since 2008. And one of my huge privileges is I get to go around the state of Ohio and spend time with folks who are trying to change the world and people involved in various charities and organizations. And I so miss being able to do that right now with our coronavirus. We are working at home, the Attorney General's office, and some people love working at home. I'm not one of them because I very much miss being in connection with people. And so it turns out I'm an extrovert. And that's, that is the way life is right now. My husband, however, loves working at home, and he says he's been doing social distancing since long before it was popular to do. So he's quite satisfied being here. So let's see who we got here.
Everyone, if you can put your name and the organization and your role, please, in the chat box.
Yeah. What does the Thomas Werner Center do? Oh, and you're brand new. And we have Gateway Youth Development. Do they do programming with children? Habitat for Humanity, I know about them. I know what you do. In fact, my niece just started as an AmeriCorps with Habitat of Humanity here in Columbus 2 weeks ago.
Somebody's delivering something to you.
Yes, this is the good part of working at home. I have my own IT technical support and other emergency services. Wood Lane,
in the mail.
He's gonna bill me, he says. Oh, Wood Lane Residential Services for folks with disabilities, nonprofit fundraising background. You know that my guess is that you've been through a lot of things. And we have Danielle, who's working on creating a founding board for a charter school. Okay. Gateway Youth and the Werner Center. Transitional Independent Living. Okay, so we have a nice collection of people doing all kinds of work. How many of you all are staff people versus how many are board members?
For those just arriving in the meeting, can you please enter your name, the organization, and your role into the chat box?
So we have staff, and we have a board member. Okay, so this is a nice mix too. So what we're going to be talking about is stuff that applies to both staff members, key staff members, as well as board members in the leadership of organizations. So we have someone, Family House. What does Family House do?
We are a shelter for homeless families.
Okay, great. Well, welcome. And
Thank
then
you.
we have Ashley is with Bethany House, and help me with the pronunciation, Adelante? Is that correct? It's a resource center.
Yes, Adelante. You said it right.
Okay, good. And what does Bethany House do?
It's a long traditional housing for victims of domestic violence.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry to hear that. Have you found an increase in people needing services during coronavirus?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know that's the case.
Yes.
So did we touch on everybody? Anybody want to share before we get started? So we're together for a long time this morning, and so it'll be far more useful for everyone and more enjoyable, actually, if you jump out and share when you have questions, or if you want to disagree with me, or if you have an example of how this can be more effective, or just if you think there's something worth chatting about. I'm using screen share, and do people see does it say minding the business while changing the world in what you're seeing on my screen share?
No, the page that's up is the thanks for joining the nude webinar.
Okay, that's what you all see? Now
Yeah.
I know where I am. Somehow, I don't know, the technology gods aren't with me today. So Heather mentioned that we call this changing, minding the business while changing the world, charitable board member roles and responsibilities, because often we have people who are connected with charitable organizations who have a real passion for the work of the organization. And I am certain that each and every one of you aren't doing what you're doing unless you feel a real connection and commitment to it. But when you're a board member or a key staff person, being a cheerleader for the cause is not nearly enough. And there are really important legal obligations that leaders have. And to ignore those and not to get your mind set in the right direction to make sure all your bases are covered really can jeopardize the long-term viability of the organization and will jeopardize the ability to provide those meaningful services. And so you have to take time out and make sure that you're being attentive to those legal obligations and running this organization like the business that it really is, so that everyone that depends and relies on you for assistance will be able to seek it from your organization. Now, we are the regulators in the charitable law section of the nonprofit sector in Ohio, but we come to our work every day with a real sense of respect and appreciation for folks who are involved in the sector. And we know that all of our lives are richer because of the way that charitable organizations enhance the quality of the lives that we live here in Ohio. And if you think of all the different ways that the work of charitable organizations touches our lives and our family lives, it's enormous. You know, you may drop off kids in the morning to a child care program or a youth development program of some sort. I don't know if I made things better. I changed something.
Yes.
Is it better?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. You may take your kids to play soccer in the evening. You may be involved in music or arts groups. You may be involved in some sort of healthcare related organization. And I seem to remember someone was involved with NAMI, who was with us this morning, which does fabulous work. That's a real lifesaver for a number of families and friends of mine. You may have, there's charitable organizations that do all kinds of things for veterans, older folks, cancer patients. The list is endless, but the impact of the work that all these groups do really do impact our lives every day. And in the charitable law section, we too are recipients of the great services of charity. So we thank you. So don't be mistaken in believing that just because we're the big bad regulators that we don't have hearts. We do, and we appreciate what's going on out there. We know it doesn't come magically or without real hard work. And so in addition to, all our crossing the T's and dotting the I kind of regulatory work, we also want to try to provide resources to help folks better know how to run their charitable organizations. So part of my job is trying to help good people do good things the right way. And we've developed a number of resources out there. Back in the olden days, I used to travel all around the state, and I would have been spending the whole day today in Toledo doing this training. We have resources on our webpage, and we have a brand new webpage that has only been up for a couple of weeks now. And let me give you will get transferred there from the regular Attorney General page, but it's charitable.ohioago.gov. That's charitable.ohioago.gov, and it is brand new. It's easier to find things where all of the charitable stuff is in one place. And, we got a lot of feedback from folks that it was hard to hunt through the entire Attorney General webpage. So now all the charitable stuff is on one website. And we're going to be putting more and more resource information up there. Again, all geared with trying to help good people do good things the right way. So if you are not subscribed to our nonprofit newsletter, please do that, because we will try to provide some resources there. During the coronavirus, when it first started, we put up a number of resources related to issues that we thought charities needed to be mindful of during this new situation that we're all struggling through. So we try to be responsive and put things up that we think will be meaningful. Check it out. If you have suggestions or questions, let us know. And let me give you my personal email address right now in case you ever need to reach out to me. It's beth.short@ohioattorneygeneral.gov. beth.short@ohioattorneygeneral.gov. Please let me know if you have suggestions or ways to reach out to other organizations that you think could benefit from board governance training. Let's figure out how to make that happen so that groups can continue doing their great work and do it without running into troubles. Well, some folks are often surprised to learn that the Attorney General's office is involved in the charitable sector at all. They think of us primarily as, we are the state's attorney. We also have BCI, in which we do a lot of criminal investigations supporting local law enforcement all around the state. But monitoring and providing oversight of the charitable sector is actually the oldest responsibility of attorney generals. And it goes back to the Middle Ages, back to jolly old England. And back then, sometimes people would leave behind money when they died to help the orphans in the village, for instance. But sometimes the trustees, they got the money to the orphans in the village, and sometimes they helped themselves to the money that should have gone to the orphans in the village and bought shinier coats of armor or faster horses, something like that, instead of helping the orphans. And so in 1601, they developed the Statute of Charitable Uses. And that says that the Attorney General shall have the authority to stand in the shoes of the beneficiaries and force the trustees to do the right thing. And so that continues to be the theme of our work, is making sure that the intended beneficiaries are the ones that are benefiting rather than folks who are dealing money around the table at the board meeting, or those folks who are buying faster horses and shinier suits of armor in today's times, whatever that might be. And so holding trustees responsible is how the entire system of our charitable network works. It's all premised on the fact that board members are overseeing this charitable trust and making sure the right thing happens, and that funds and resources and energies are being spent on the mission instead of being selfishly spent by someone else. So when we talk about the charitable sector, we are talking about this gigantic network of all kinds of organizations. They may be multi-million-dollar organizations that could have thousands of employees, or it could be a very grassroots organization, maybe a group of grandmothers forming a reading club in a local park. And it could be everything in between. But whether you're large and complex and sophisticated or small with precious little money and certainly no staff, board members of all of those groups have the exact same identical obligations and responsibilities. Now here's where I like to go through the basics. There are multiple government entities involved in the establishment and ongoing operation of a charity. And let's assume that there's going to be a new high school built in anywhere, Ohio. And you can assume that that high school is going to need an athletic booster club. And so how do they go about getting started? What are the various government entities that they're going to need to interface with, and what are their ongoing responsibilities with those governmental entities? I'm going to stop here to note that many times people say, you know, you all ought to do some trainings about how to start up new charities. We often get asked for input about starting charities, and you know, we too often run into situations where people have contacted us and said, hey, I've got a new idea for how I can do something to help a group in the community. So obviously I need to go out and start a brand new charity. And my first response is stop, you know, maybe not, please don't. Because the truth is that many people start charities without the commitment to running it like the business that it is. And they don't have any idea about the ongoing responsibilities, and they would have been far better off to do those wonderful new ideas in conjunction with another organization in the community, someone that might already have their board governance structure set up, until they can figure out whether there really is an energy and a need to start a brand new charity for this service, because sometimes there isn't, and they don't have the capacity to continue on. So before you run out and start a brand new charity, really think hard and fast, and maybe give it a trial run and doing it in partnership with another group. But for anywhere high school, you can assume that there's going to be a need to start its own booster group for the Anywhere Eagles. So our first stop generally is going to be the Ohio Secretary of State's office, and we're going to incorporate Anywhere boosters, the Anywhere High School Booster Group. And we go to the Secretary of State's office, and Indeed, no other group has that name. And so they're going to let us file articles of incorporation. It's going to list the purpose of the group and some other initial information. And voila, we have ourselves an incorporation, a corporation. Now, the Secretary of State handles filings for all kinds of businesses doing work in the state of Ohio. Whether you're a for-profit, a nonprofit, you can be an unincorporated association. There's no requirement that charitable organizations have to be incorporated, but there are some very good legal protections that come with being incorporated. So that's probably the most common decision that is made. So we've now received word from the Secretary of State that we indeed are incorporated. Now, when we make those filings, we're also going to have to register a statutory agent. And a statutory agent is filed in the Secretary of State's office, as this is the way that if you have official business with an entity and you can't find any other way of contacting them, like they don't have a giant downtown office building, you can send something to the statutory agent whose job is to make sure that the executives and leaders of that business or that nonprofit receive notice of things. So for instance, if someone has died in the state of California and left a giant bequest for your organization, the attorney in California is merely going to go to the Secretary of State's office, look up and see who the statutory agent is for the organization and send out a notice that way. This needs to be maintained so that we often run into situations where a charity discovers, like, oh my goodness, Joe Smith is listed as our statutory agent and Joe left Ohio 8 years ago. So here's my suggestion. If you're on the board or a leader of an organization, every year go into the Secretary of State's business filing search, look up your organization. Make sure it says that you are an active incorporation in the state of Ohio. Now, to maintain that active status, every 5 years you have to do a continued existence filing with the Secretary of State's office that tells the Secretary of State, yes, indeed, we're still in business. Do not cancel our articles. So if you check every year when you're on the board of an organization, you won't miss that 5th year. It's often impossible to try to remember what year you need to get your driver's license renewed. Well, this is the same sort of thing. So if you're on the board every year, go in and check to make sure you know what it says in the Secretary of State's files about your organization. Is it your year to file the continued existence filing? Does it say you're an active corporation? Who is your statutory agent, and is that person still a good contact for your organization? So that's an ongoing responsibility you will have with the Secretary of State's office. Now, anywhere booster group, the next step is going to go to the IRS and get an EIN, which is an employee identification number. That takes about 2.5 minutes. They give them out routinely, and this becomes your unique identifier that will be used in many contexts. So you have your EIN, and then the next step is I'm going to have to file for tax exempt status. The IRS is the only one that issues tax exempt statuses to organizations. There are many different types of tax exempt organizations. Your credit union, the Chamber of Commerce, homeowners associations, the Elks Club, those are all tax exempt entities. But what we are primarily talking about are 501c3 organizations, and those are the types of groups that donors can write tax deductible donations to. So we're going to have to convince the IRS in the filing that we make with them that the purposes of this new charity are to help a broad range of unknown beneficiaries in some way that helps in a charitable way. So I could set up a foundation, Beth's Foundation, to give scholarships to members of my family. Members of my family would be very grateful, but that will not pass muster with the IRS because it's not an undefined class of beneficiaries. It's benefiting a very narrow group of people, my relatives. Now, if I set up that same foundation and said I was going to give scholarships to graduates from my hometown high school or my hometown in general, that's a much larger unknown group of people. You cannot guess who might be getting scholarships from that sort of thing. That will satisfy the IRS requirement to make sure that there's no personal benefit, that I'm not just setting this up to help my friends, to help my family members. So the IRS grants tax exempt status to 501c3 groups, and assuming we fill out the forms fairly well, the booster group is indeed going to be granted tax exempt status as a 501c3. Now, there's one large category of organizations that doesn't have to go to the IRS for permission to be treated as a 501c3, and that is churches, temples, synagogues, mosques. Exclusively religious organizations do not have to ask the IRS for permission to be treated as 501c3s. But if you're not exclusively religious, you indeed need to get that tax exempt status from the IRS. Once you receive that IRS letter saying, congratulations, you're now a 501c3 organization, you have an ongoing responsibility to the IRS. They expect the annual filing of a 990, and it gives information about what your organization does and how it spends its money. There's a different form that needs to be filled out based on how large your organization is. So the larger the organization, the more information they're going to ask for. But that's an annual obligation that the board and the organization has. And if you fail to file that for 3 years, you are automatically revoked and you lose your tax exempt status. Now, the 990 is a public document that donors or anyone else can ask to see. And in fact, if you go to candid.org, you can set up a free account and you can go in and look at the 990s of any charity in the country. They're public documents, and if someone comes to your office and wants to see the 990, you must provide it. And in the interest of transparency and accountability, many groups list their 990s on their webpage. So this is another thing as a board member that you can do. You can go to the irs.gov, and in the top bar of their webpage is a button for tax exempt organizations. You can use their charities check function to make sure that they still list your organization as an active 501c3. You can go to Candid, GuideStar, and there are several other sites that will list 501c3s and their 990s. Make sure that your organization's return shows up there so that you can satisfy yourself that indeed those filings are being properly met and made. And the board ought to be looking at this and approving it and knowing what's in it before it gets filed. So that's an ongoing obligation that you have to the IRS. And then every new charity within 6 months or prior to soliciting needs to make a filing in my office, in the Ohio Attorney General's office. And we have an online registration system, and we'll get to that in a minute. But this is a responsibility that there's an annual filing responsibility with my office. It's the exact same date that your 990 is due. If you get an extension on filing your 990 with the IRS, we're going to give you an extension too. So often if people think of them as your federal tax return and your state tax return, like we all do when we're filing our own, remember you have a filing with us, and I'll show you in a moment what that online system looks like. This has been the law in the state of Ohio since 1951, so it's nothing new. Most states in the country have some sort of charity registration requirement, and of course they're all different. So if you are in Toledo, there's a chance that you might be doing fundraising efforts that might cross state lines into either Indiana or Michigan. If you're doing businesses in another state, you need to have an idea of what those requirements are there, because they may well require a filing in their state as well. So be aware of the obligations based on where you're actually doing business and services. So every year, there needs to be a filing, you can go into our website, and as a board member, I would do this once a year, type in the name or the EIN of your organization, and up will pop a box, and hopefully it always says, yes, your filings are current and you're all good to go. So these are 3 ways, 3 ongoing obligations just to keep running the organization that charities have, and the leaders need to make sure are taken care of. I also should note that just like with the IRS, if you're exclusively religious, you don't have an obligation to file in my office. So that's the biggest exception to the general rule about obligations with the IRS in my office. So these 3 government entities you're going to have ongoing connections with for the life of your charity. And then, unfortunately, this is what we run into far too often, is something that's gone wrong in a charitable organization and gone wrong in a very bad way. When this happens, it's often not a stranger. It's often someone that is very well known to the organization, perhaps a longtime staff member, longtime volunteer, a friend, someone that people personally trusted. When you're the board member or a key staff person at an organization, this happens, it's heartbreaking. You feel a personal betrayal from the person that did it because you often know them. You feel a sense of embarrassment that this happened on your watch. Sometimes, there is a financial loss that the organization sometimes is unable to overcome, and it can also impact the reputation of the organization. What we find far too often is that we have a board that has been asleep at the wheel when this has gone on. That makes it even more heartbreaking. And so job number 1 of board members is to make sure that you have policies in place that make this kind of thing harder to successfully have happen, or to allow your organization to discover it far more quickly should things go wrong. I'm going to take a minute. Has anyone ever been involved, and it's not to embarrass you, but has anyone been involved in a situation where this sort of thing happened? If you could type it into the notes. Often someone has been through this sort of thing when I do trainings, and they are one of the first people to say, listen to what she says, no one wants to have this happen, it's awful. So we have countless situations which all have predictable kinds of facts going on. Often there is one person who has served as the treasurer of an organization, let's say treasurer of the church, for a very long time. Everyone trusted her. Everyone loved her. When this happens, they're devastated. What they did, the CFO, thank you for sharing. So the CFO was discovered at an organization to have been embezzling money. Were they writing checks to like a fake, and Heather shares, unfortunately, that Toledo is not immune from this happening. The person that had a CFO or someone else, anyone want to share that situation? And particularly if you can say, yes, Beth, you're right, it was a heartbreaking situation, that could be helpful. Does anyone want to shout out?
Yeah, that was me. Yes, the CFO was writing checks to himself, and he went on vacation and forgot that that was the month when the bank statement will come in. And as another employee was reviewing the bank statements, they discovered this. We were in the middle of a capital campaign, so that immediately started another campaign to clarify everything and be transparent. At that organization, we decided to give everyone the details that we had and just be open and honest. We put an ad in the paper first, and then continue with following up on communications. But we felt We just needed to be open and transparent to everyone and let them know that it had going on and acknowledge it rather than have rumors flying. So we had a lot of support from the community. I mean, it was an unfortunate incident, but people understood that sometimes it happens. And
So did he just write checks to himself and no one else ever did a review of the bank account?
no, he had control of that, obviously purposely. He was a relatively small organization. They had 3 people in the accounting department. So he was able to hide it. And this was many years ago, so I may not remember all the specifics,
Yeah.
but
It's a painful thing, isn't it?
it is, because he was somebody that we trusted and everybody felt betrayed. And, you know, the morale goes down in the organization because it affects everyone, because, you know, everyone works hard. And to have somebody do that, whether you want it or not, you feel it personally.
Well, of course, because no one works in charities these days unless they're committed to that cause.
Yeah.
And so here is someone that has, I can't imagine the pain that people felt because it's someone that you worked with side by side, that you trusted, that you were, you know, committed and passionate about this cause, and you find out that they were not as committed and passionate to in a sacrificial way as everyone else did. What we often discover, unfortunately, is a scenario much like the one you just described, and thank you for sharing. I often have people and they'll say, listen to what she says because it's awful. You don't want this to happen to you or your worst enemy. But what we find is that there's a situation in which someone is trusted, someone is often beloved. And then because of that, we allow them to do things that, had we taken a few steps back and thought more objectively, just was not a good idea to begin with. Trust is not an internal control. And that's why I say boards have the absolute obligation to make sure there are procedures in place to protect the assets that you have, to protect the charitable resources you have. And the only way that you're able to do that is by having multiple people involved in the financial operations of an organization. No matter how big or how small you are, there needs to be multiple people involved because, you know, in today's day and age, you know, there are things that go on behind closed doors of Ohio families all across the state that we never know about. We may never know when there's a substance abuse problem going on. We may never know when there's an emotional issue, a family problem, a financial crisis, or any of those kinds of things that go on behind closed doors. Gambling problems, all kinds of things can pop up that end up controlling the activities of how people behave. And they certainly don't walk around with signs saying, don't ever trust me with your money because I have a substance abuse problem, I have a gambling problem. I mean, people, you know, if we knew those sorts of things, it would be far more easy to guess. So we never have to guess about the ongoing trustworthiness of someone. Instead, we develop policies and procedures that involve lots of people and allow lots of people to be checking and rechecking what assets are there, what transactions are taking place. And that's the only way to prevent things like what she just explained happen. And it can happen so easily. So I was elected treasurer at my church. And at my church, once you're elected treasurer, the only way to get out of being treasurer is to move or die. It seemed like a position that, you know, you had for many years at my church. So I became the president, or the treasurer rather. And I also wanted people to know that I took the job very seriously. I didn't want anything to hurt the church. I'd rather hurt my family's budget than the church's budget. So I was nervous. We didn't have policies and procedures. So we spent a year developing an approach, like what does it look like to responsibly handle the financial affairs of this organization? And so we developed a report. So every month, a report with pre-agreed information was shared with the council. But before it went to the council, it was double checked by 2 of 5 people who went into the online banking and made sure that there weren't extra transactions that I hadn't reported. What we find sometimes in churches is we have a treasurer or a secretary, it could be a volunteer or a staff person, who just continues to present reports that don't at all represent what the real activities in the bank account are, where they're just like in this situation that she just shared. The bank, if anyone would have gone in to look at what was going on in the bank account, they would have easily seen these transactions. We had a church up in Northeast Ohio where a woman stole hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I asked the pastor, how did she do it? You know, was there a fancy scheme in which she had phantom employees or phantom suppliers? No, she just transferred money out of the church account into her own personal account periodically, and it added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars in a year and a half. If any person would have gone in to the online banking account, they would have said, wait a minute, what are these transactions that aren't reported elsewhere? That would have saved so much heartache for the folks in that church. So in my role as treasurer, I wanted lots of people to see that I was trying to do a very transparent job. I didn't want people saying, oh, Beth and John just took a vacation, you know, to Europe. I hope they didn't use the church money. I didn't want anyone to have an occasion to have to even raise that. And so we involved lots of people, and with online banking, it's so much simpler than back in the olden days, because you can just do it right here from your desktop. You can see how many transactions they were. Are they the same ones that show up here? That's one way, an easy way to make sure that you're exercising control and due diligence in protecting what you have. Now, the good news was I am no longer treasurer at my church. Because we set up these processes, it made it far easier for other people to feel that they could step into these responsibilities, because they didn't have to start from scratch. They had the confidence of knowing that people had thought through how this could be done. And so these processes protect the organization, they protect the people doing these jobs, and they also help with continuity. So you have to step back and look at your organization and think about the various types of transactions you're involved with, both with funds coming in and funds going out. And have you adequately developed some procedures that can give you the confidence of knowing that you're doing things in a pretty secure way. So I was doing a training on the western part of the state once, and someone told church, and the bank contacted them one day and said, did you know that when you make the deposits on Monday mornings for your plate offerings from Sunday worship, there are never $10 bills in it? And the secretary said, no, never paid any attention to that. So the next Sunday, they threw in a number of $10 bills. And then when the plate collection was counted and the deposit was prepared, there were no $10 bills to put in the deposit. Well, it turns out they had one usher who counted out the collection plate and made $10 bills the personal tithe to himself. And it wasn't enough that it damaged the church. They never knew how many $10 bills to expect. But if they'd had two unrelated people counting out the money, it's much more difficult to involve two people in those kinds of schemes. So we have a publication online called Protecting the Integrity of Your Nonprofit. It's called Avoiding Theft. We have 20 plus ideas in here about various types of controls that you might want to think of. What we're looking at for separation of duties and making sure that there's multiple people involved. Unfortunately, those that are set on doing harm to an organization can find some pretty creative ways to do it. But if you have processes in place, you also will be able to catch it more quickly than allowing it to go on for an extended period of time, which just greatly increases the amount of damage that is done. So take a look at that avoiding theft publication. Think about the kinds of things you do in your organization. We've had some recent problems with people are using PayPal and some online payment platforms. Those should be treated just like bank accounts, where you should have multiple people involved in looking like, really, what was the total in terms of memberships that were sold through PayPal? Is the full amount being deposited into the organization's bank account? So whenever you can have multiple people involved, that greatly enhances, one, the ability to find mistakes and get corrections made, and two, it's a real active way to discourage people from taking advantage of resources that are there. Does anyone want to throw in any comments or suggestions on this sort of thing? Sometimes we find, we here in the Midwest are often known as polite people. And so we have folks who say, well, I don't want to ask Mrs. Smith to have to do things differently. She's been our volunteer for 20 years. I don't want to insult her by saying we now need to have internal controls put in place. If Mrs. Smith is committed to the good work of the organization, she's going to welcome having different people involved. And so being polite is not a good way to counterbalance your other obligations to providing leadership to the organization and your legal obligations as a board member or leader. So check out that avoiding theft and see if there are things that you ought to be thinking about approaching differently in your organization, just to make sure that you don't find your organization's name in the headlines for something like this. You want to be in the headlines for the great work that you're doing and not for the heartbreak that can occur from these sorts of things. So what do we do as a regulator of charitable organizations? Well, in my office, I work with compliance examiners, accountants, investigators, and lawyers. We get complaints that are filed either online, or someone calls us or sends us a letter, and they share information or concerns about the operations of an organization. Now, you'll learn in a minute or two, we also license bingo, which is a fundraiser that hundreds of charities use. And we'll get complaints from people saying they were not very polite to me last Tuesday night at bingo. That complaint that's filed in our system is going to get a different reception than a complaint saying, I'm a board member with this charity. I have routinely asked for financial reports from the executive director and the CFO, and they refuse to share information with the board, and I'm very concerned about what's going on. That complaint will get a lot of attention from us. We have the ability to ask for documents, to do interviews with people, and based on what we find, there can be a number of different outcomes of a complaint. We may find that we can find absolutely no validity to the complaint that's been raised, and we move along to something else. We may find that while we don't find any evidence of what was alleged in the complaint, but what we have discovered is a group that does not have its board governance practices up to par. We will provide technical assistance and try to get them to where they should be so that they can safely operate in the future. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to file lawsuits. We may file to have to take down a group because they're basically just a fraudulent organization. We may file to have certain board members removed, or we may file suit to recover funds that have been improperly spent. And then sometimes we work with local law enforcement on criminal prosecutions. So the results and the path of a complaint in our office can go many different ways depending on what we find. But in all cases, our goal is to, shut off the leak if there are funds that are leaking out of an organization and not being put to use for the mission. We want to shut that leak off because, as you all know, we have only a limited pot of charitable resources, and we have great needs, and there is no shortage of the needs that charitable organizations could fulfill given more resources. So we want to stop the leak of resources going out as quickly as we can. If you're aware of a group that you think there may be concerns going on, the activities of other groups affect the integrity that the public grants to charitable organizations in general. So if we can the more quickly we can identify problems and prevent more funds from being diverted from the charitable sector, the better off we all are. So let us know. Now, I mentioned our online charitable registration system, and hopefully this looks a little familiar to folks. This is where the Research Charities page, you can go in, you can type the name of any organization in and the name or the EIN. And if they're in our database, and if they're an Ohio charity and not a religious one, that I hope they are, Anywhere Boosters should be in here. And so we type in the name of the group, and if they're in our database, up is going to pop a panel of information. There's going to be some basic demographic kind of information about where to find them. There's going to be a box that says, is this organization's registration status current, yes or no? Hopefully it always says yes. Many foundations and governmental organizations, United Way, will not pass along, will not write contracts and that sort of thing if it says no. So members of the public are checking this. So you, as a board member, this is where you ought to go in and make sure that it always says yes. If it says no, if you have an account in our system, and we suggest that at least 3 people from every organization have a personal account in our system. So if it says no, you can go into the to-do page, look up, it'll list exactly what is due, what we don't have that is needed. Every time there's a filing that's due, we will send email reminders out. And so if you have a filing that comes up, sometimes Mrs. Smith is the one that took care of all the filings for the organization. She finally retires to Florida. No one knew everything that Mrs. Smith did. If there's 3 people in the system, hopefully our reminder emails are less likely to fall through the cracks. So that's why we like to suggest that multiple people with the group have an account in our system. And then they will be able to get that email and avoid late filings or falling out of compliance. Has anyone done the filing? Anyone on the call? Has anyone been responsible for doing the filing in my system? And did you survive? We like to think it's a pretty intuitive system that's pretty easy. Do we have any confessions out there that want to type in the chat area? Do we have any survivors of Ohio's online registration system? I don't see anybody typing in. Well, trust me, taking care of your registration requirements is a pretty easy thing. We have little bubbles that tell you exactly what the information is, even where to find it. And if you have your 990 right beside you when you're filling it out, we even tell you what line and what page on the 990 to look for to find an answer so that you can answer the various financial questions that we ask about. The other value of this is we like to talk about donors being wise donors and knowing who they're giving to and how those funds are being spent. And so this is another tool that we used to do online. Instead of online, it was all paper filings, and we killed many forests in South America with all the paper filings that we got. But the information wasn't shareable, and now it's online, and the public can go in and benefit from the information that your organization shares with us during that registration and annual filing process. So there's some of the very broad financial questions that we ask. So there are a number of statutory provisions that apply to the ongoing work of charities that we're going to cover rather quickly here. The Charitable Trust Act is Ohio Revised Code Section 109. It talks about this registration system. The registration requirement applies certainly to all 501c3s, but actually it applies to charitable trusts. And people say, I'm not a trust. I had nothing to do with a probate case. I'm not a trust fund baby. But a charitable trust is broadly defined as any time you're holding assets that are to be used for a charitable, religious, or educational purpose. It doesn't matter if you're incorporated or unincorporated. It doesn't matter if you are a tax-exempt entity or not. You could be a for-profit entity. And that makes you subject to our oversight, and you may have registration responsibilities. But moreover, you have a commitment then to making proper and wise use of those resources. So many people think that by not filing with the Secretary of State, the IRS, or my office, you escape obligations and can fly under the radar. But if you walk like a duck and quack like a duck, we're going to call you a duck. And if you are committing fraudulent acts with funds that have been entrusted to you by donors to be used for a charitable purpose, we will come after you if you are misspending in funds and committing fraud. So 109 creates the reporting system. It gives us enforcement and investigatory authority. It also involves us in certain types of litigation and certain types of transactions. 1716 is Ohio's Solicitation Act. Solicitation, most of us rely on just fundraising from donors who send us checks, but solicitation can take place in many different ways. It's anytime an appeal is made that suggests that there will be a charitable purpose that will be honored through either a contribution of anything of value, which means just a plain old check. It could mean the donation of used clothing, used furniture, bingo, special events, selling concessions at the community festival, spaghetti dinners, bingo. Those are all solicitations. And the big thing to remember that whenever you are soliciting under 1716, you are prohibited from making misleading or fraudulent claims. You're not allowed to lie to raise money. And that seems pretty straightforward to most of us, but it's a hard thing, apparently, for some people to keep track of. Now, 1716 also covers the activities of professional solicitors who are hired by charitable organizations to do fundraising for them. Professional solicitors, and if you think, most commonly we're talking about direct mail, we're talking about telemarketing kinds of things most generally. Professional solicitors have to be registered with us annually. They have to be bonded. They have to provide us notice of every campaign, as well as the contractual arrangements with the charity. And those reports are available on our webpage. 1702 is the Ohio Nonprofit Corporation Law, and it outlines various ways that we in Ohio expect nonprofits to run. While this is normally a really boring part of the law and makes great bedtime reading, 1702 came in helpful so many times during the start of the coronavirus situation that we find ourselves in now. There's default language in 1702 so that if a group's bylaws don't speak to a particular thing, you might be able to find the answer in 1702. So for instance, when we were all forbidden from doing gatherings, people were saying, what about my board meeting? 1702 allows boards to do meetings electronically using Zoom or other types of platforms, unless your board bylaws forbid it. So this was a huge relief to charities throughout the state that, yes, indeed, they could continue meeting during the pandemic. They could be doing all kinds of meetings online. In fact, unfortunately, we are going to be losing charities who are not going to survive the pandemic we're going to lose businesses too. There are some estimates that anywhere between 8 and 40% of charities may not survive this time. It's my guess that the ones that continue meeting and being strategic and thinking about how do we respond to this very unusual situation, how can we remain relevant, are we communicating what's going on with the communities that need to know about us? Those are going to be the ones that have the far better chances to survival. And so taking a look at 1702 can be good bedtime reading, but it also can be a real lifesaver when we're going through these kinds of situations that none of us ever anticipated. Then there's 2915. I mentioned before that my organization does bingo licensing. It wasn't that long ago that Ohio was a non-gambling state. But the General Assembly carved out a number of special circumstances and exemptions for charities. So in spite of being a non-gambling state, they created bingo for charities to use as a fundraising activity. All bingo requires a license. So if you're going to play purse bingo or any other kind of bingo, you need to have a license to do so. We used to do, back in the old days, what we called bingo schools all over the state of Ohio. We'd have separate gatherings for 501c3s and then separate gatherings for vet, frat, and fraternal organizations, which can also get bingo licensing. The reporting standards are slightly different. If you're going to do bingo, there are two different types of bingo that require a license. Now, clearly, the bingo that we play in kindergarten doesn't need a license because no one is paying to play. There are certain exemptions for some senior center bingo that's pretty minor in terms of both the possible winnings and what participants play. But outside of that, you need to have a license. And the important thing about bingo is whether it's type 1, which is the traditional bingo game that we grew up playing, or if it's instant tickets, which look a lot like lottery tickets, and you crack open the back and it tells you whether you're a winner. That's frankly where all the money is made in bingo. The year I started in 2008, there was, I think, $1.2 billion spent on bingo in the state of Ohio. $1.2 billion. It's mostly all cash, which means that sticky fingers can walk out with a lot of money if groups are not paying attention to record keeping and making sure that the organization is the beneficiary and not someone walking out with your money. So we do these bingo schools to try to help people understand how to best do that so that you can indeed avoid sticky fingers. Purse bingo, if people are paying to play bingo for a prize, it requires a license. The license isn't that difficult to get, but it does require volunteers and it requires keeping track of things. The easiest type of bingo for organizations is a type 3 license, which means that there are instant tickets being sold, not in connection with a bingo game. You could have restaurants, bars, gas stations in your town selling instant bingo tickets on your behalf. It's a fairly risk-free operation for the charities because those businesses have to pay in advance for the box of instant tickets that they will then administer on your behalf. So I'll open it up in a minute after we get through these in case you have any questions about that. Now, in this non-gambling world that we used to live in Ohio, the General Assembly also carved out raffles. We get questions every day about raffles. So charities can hold raffles. People and businesses cannot. So I cannot raffle off my husband's antique motorcycle and say it's going to support breast cancer research. That would be an illegal raffle. But if I went to the Stephanie Spielman Foundation and asked if they would be interested in working together on this, that would become a legal raffle because the charity is doing it. It's not just me. You won't be surprised to know that there's a lot of fraud that goes on in raffles. Charities are the folks that need to be doing it. There is no license required for doing raffles. There's no special reporting like bingo. So if you want to do a purse raffle, absolutely. If it's a purse bingo, that requires a license. Now, under 2915, the General Assembly also said, you know, we also know that charities might want to hold some casino nights and other kinds of special events where, you know, you come together and people have a good night of, I don't know what they play because I don't go to those kinds of events. That's permitted under the law. However, there are very specific guidelines that you have to use. There are limitations on how often you can have games of chance being used like this, is what they're defined as. So you have, first of all, you have to make sure that what you're doing is playing games of chance, which are legal for charities, versus schemes of chance, which just sounds bad. So schemes of chance are always illegal. So you decide you're going to have a casino night. You cannot have it at a restaurant or a hotel. You can only have it at a facility owned by the charity or leased from a government or veteran organization. And then there are also restrictions on what you can do. You can never play craps and roulette. I don't know why. Something horrible must happen. I'm not sure, but the 2915 specifically says that craps and roulette are always prohibited at those things. Now you may ask, like, oh my goodness, it just seems like so much. Let me also tell you that this is all found in 2915 in the Ohio Revised Code. Chapter 29 is Ohio's criminal code. So 2915 sets between like murder and drug trafficking. And violations of 2915 can also bring criminal consequences. And those criminal citations are going to be issued by local law enforcement, not the charitable law section. We are not the gambling police. We don't tell people whether what they want to do is legal or illegal, because it well, first of all, we can't give legal advice. And secondly, it's not our call because the local law enforcement, sheriff's deputies, township police, the municipal police, they're the ones that are going to make the call. So if you're going to engage in these kinds of activities, make sure that you take a look at 2915 and that you're doing it in the right way. Anyone have any questions? I know there was some chatter about that. Anyone want to shout out any questions, comments? Anybody? Has anybody ever hosted one of these events? Do we kindly tell them about law restrictions? Yes, we try to. We try to educate the charitable community in ways that we're doing it right now. So if you're going to engage in any gambling related activity, take a look at 2915, make sure you're doing it the right way. And again, it's not necessarily just restricted to the charitable law section, because having the sheriff's deputy write out criminal citations for you and having your name in the paper that way, probably not the kind of promotion you're looking for your charity. So be mindful that there are limitations to gambling related activities, and take a look at 2915. And if you have a question, shoot me an email, or how long does it take to get a license? So licenses run from January 1 to December 31st. If you have any thought of wanting to start a bingo game, applying in the off season, like right now, would be an ideal time to submit a license, because on December 31st, we will have roughly 1,800 licenses to go through to get people renewed. So we'll be quite backed up at the beginning of the year, which is why if you want to apply, if you have any thought of applying for a license, do so before the beginning of a calendar year, because we're going to be flooded with applications in January. Is it dependent on someone reporting the event to the AG's office? I'm not sure what that means. And I will tell you that we routinely get complaints from folks who probably have been with organizations that have hosted some inappropriate things. So they are now on the lookout for any other charity, and they will file complaints with us about, I think, look here, I think this group is doing an illegal bingo game, and we will reach out to them and see if we can work with them on getting it taken care of. But there are people out there in the community who are on the lookout to make sure that they follow the rules. And sometimes they're with groups that are licensed, and they say, we do it the right way, and we expect everyone else to as well. So again, we want to.
This is Heather. That was my question. So, are you, the AG's office, actively out scanning the environment, or do you react when someone brings something to your attention?
I'd say a little of both.
Okay, thank you.
We don't spend a whole lot of time, frankly, when I go into a city, I kind of do this like, la, 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 like, don't tell me what you're trying to do, because I don't know that I want to know. So we do become aware of things and we try to respond, but do know that there are people whose hobby it is to see how many complaints they can file with our office. And indeed, we then have a responsibility to look into it. And they send a lot of Facebook postings that they've seen. So one thing I should make you aware of, and this seems to have kicked up since coronavirus, is a number of Facebook raffles. And they seem not to be by charitable organizations. They seem to be by individuals who are selling raffle tickets for like lots of goods, like, you know, a pallet full of this or that. Obviously, that is illegal. We don't have any jurisdiction in that. In fact, we have no criminal jurisdiction at all in the Attorney General's office. When we're involved in criminal cases, we're doing so following the invitation of local law enforcement to be involved. So we get these complaints about illegal raffles, which we then forward on to local law enforcement, because we don't have any authority to do anything about it unless there's a charitable connection. If you're doing a raffle, you can sell the tickets online, but the winning ticket needs to be drawn from a receptacle of some sort. It cannot be just an electronically generated random number. Again, I think that's because there is there's a lot of fraud that goes on. So if you're doing it, sell as many tickets as you want online, put something in a barrel that represents the equivalent of a tear-off tag, and draw your winner from that. That will keep you clear of any problems that it's become a scheme of chance, which is illegal. So just to be clear, we're going to do a purse bingo fundraiser just once. We don't expect to do this or any bingo beyond once. Yes. So that does require a license. So your bingo license can be for an ongoing, you know, every Monday night, this group is going to have bingo, or it could be what we refer to in shorthand in the office as a festival license. So there might be a community festival and they just want to play bingo one night. That requires a license. There's provisions for that. So you can have a bingo license that's just one time, or a bingo license that is ongoing. So it just depends on what you're planning to do. But yes, anytime you do play bingo where there's an exchange of funds or something of value, you must have a license. Otherwise, it's gambling. Any other questions on that? We do get questions every day on these types of activities. And again, the important thing is the charitable law section isn't the last call on these issues. we're not, the local law enforcement is the one that can make the call about criminal consequences, which is, I think, what people would always want to avoid. So we're going to run through what we call fiduciary obligations that board members have. And remember, I said that it doesn't matter whether you're serving on the board of the Cleveland Clinic or the board of the Grandmother's Reading Club, you're going to have the same responsibilities to the organization. And we talk about those as fiduciary duties, and we're going to run through what they look like. And we talk about them in 4 different ways: the duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty to maintain accounts, and duty of compliance. Now, the duty of care, we don't expect people serving on boards to be CPAs, lawyers, financial gurus. Regular Joe and Sue Schmo make great board members, but we expect them to conduct themselves with a certain level of commitment to the cause. This language comes from statutory language about unincorporated charitable trusts. There's similar language about incorporated charitable trusts. We expect folks on the board to conduct themselves with the level of care, skill, and diligence that imaginarily, ordinarily prudent person would use in how they run their family affairs. So if you would not cash out your check, your paycheck on Friday, put the money in a paper bag, leave it on your porch overnight for one of your kids to pick up before Saturday morning, then don't do that with the concession stand money from the Friday night football game for Anywhere boosters. If you wouldn't treat your own money that way, don't treat the charity's money that way. And so we will come to some conclusions about the way people behave, making guesses about, is that what a normal person would do? Does anyone think that's okay? So we can draw some conclusions. So what does it look like when you're living up to your duty of care? Well, if you're on the board, you're actually attending the board meetings. And I know we have some staff members here, and I'm guessing that some of you spend a whole lot of effort to put together packets and that sort of thing. Wouldn't it be nice if someone read them? Well, if you're on the board and you're getting information before the board meeting, you need to read it. The idea is that then people, when they come to this limited time that everyone has together, they have prepped themselves and can spend their time together dealing with higher level discussions about policies and strategies, instead of spending time in a meeting where you have to do responsive readings of committee notes. People can read that in advance. What you want to do is, pick everyone's brains for their best ideas and comments related to what you're talking about. So take the time to read things that staff members often have taken time to compile for you. And when you get to the board meeting, you have a duty to participate. Every board member has their own individual obligation to know that every time you vote on something for the charity, that you know that it is in the best interest of the organization. You have your own independent duty that you cannot defer to someone else. You need to know yourself. You can't just say, well, Sue said it's a good idea, so I'll just vote. You can't just rubber stamp what the executive director says or anybody. You can't just ignore your concerns because Bob the bully says, come on, I want this meeting to get over with. If you have questions, you have a right to get those questions answered. You can be held accountable for what you do and what you fail to do. So when you're on the board, participate. Ignorance is not bliss. I've mentioned before, top obligation of board members is to establish policies, particularly those internal controls, those things that protect what you have and ensure that you are spending your resources towards the mission. And if you are with an organization that is larger and has staff members, you're going to be involved as a board member in hiring and firing the executive director. It's not the other way around. Sometimes we have situations in which the system has become reversed, and we have executive directors who are firing board members. Not the way it is supposed to work. We sometimes have what we call founder syndrome, where someone has created the organization, and they start to feel like they own it. It's their own personal organization or business. Who owns a charity? No one. It's a community trust. Sue Smith doesn't own the charity that she started 20 years ago any more than I do. And so we have these situations that we encounter sometimes where Sue kind of becomes the bully and thinks that the charity is hers to do with as she wishes. It's not the case. You know, for the integrity of the system, we have boards that are there to make independent judgments. That's not to say that board members should be interfering with the day-to-day operations of an organization. Not fair for an executive director to feel like he or she has 17 different bosses, all of whom want different things. It requires a mature and delicate balance of roles and responsibilities. So everyone has their responsibility to play nicely, to play strategically, to again, keep their eyes on the prize about honoring the mission and the beneficiaries of the organization. I've talked about the critical importance of financial controls and suggested you take a look at the publication we have. We're going to talk about conflict of interest in a minute. Maybe you should think about having a policy on major expenditures in your group. What's a major expenditure? I don't know. A major expenditure for the Cleveland Clinic Foundation is going to be a lot different than a major expenditure for the, let's say, the local reading club that I mentioned about that grandmothers have formed. Maybe you want to have policies about certain level of expenditures that actually require board approval, or maybe if it's over a certain amount, you always need to have at least 3 vendor quotes. So does it make sense to do that within your group? Maybe it doesn't. You can also have budgeting, spending, expenditure policies. You can have gift acceptance policies. What kinds of gifts are you willing to accept or not accept? If are you prepared to take on the responsibility of transferring car titles if someone wants to give you their car? If you don't have the capacity to do that in the right way, maybe you want to say you just can't accept that gift. Are you going to be willing to take restricted gifts, which mean you are absolutely legally obligated to only spend funds in a certain way, maybe just to send kids to a summer camp program? Are you willing to live with that promise indefinitely? Or maybe you don't want to accept gifts that come with those kinds of strings attached. Maybe you do substance abuse work. You don't want to accept any money from the liquor industry. That's perfectly fine. On the other hand, maybe you want to think to yourself that, well, they're the ones that got our clients where they are and into this spot where they are. We'll take whatever they give us. Either one is perfectly fine, but these are the kinds of things that boards can discuss and decide what makes sense for them. There may be times when the board says, you know what, this is a sticky situation. I think we need to hire a lawyer to give us the advice on what the pros and cons are on, you know, going forward in certain ways. The board can make that call. Hire a lawyer or expert counsel in some area when you think you need it. Maybe it's a lawyer, maybe it's a CPA, maybe it's a forensic audit. Maybe the Anywhere boosters are going to build a band shelter or gazebo at the new football field. Maybe rather than everyone bringing their hammers on a Saturday and jumping in, that you actually talk to a contractor and get a plan made in advance that is going to be a safe structure. So the board can make the call of when you think expert help is needed. The board can make decisions about how to conduct meetings, how often, how they're going to be handled. Are you going to let other people into the meeting? Are you going to have public comments? You can make policies on that. How many committees are you going to have? How often are they going to meet? And then under federal law, it is prohibited to take action against whistleblowers who are trying to make the board aware of potential fraudulent activities. It is prohibited to take retaliatory action against those folks. So obviously, if there's a situation involving fraud, your organization is going to want to look into it, even if it's your executive director. So make sure there's a path for that information to get through to the board. And you might want to have a crisis communication plan, how to deal with that situation if it comes up. Do you want 5 different people talking to the media about what's going on? When we talked earlier about the situation involving the theft, having a crisis communication plan can be very helpful. Having sometimes experts can be very helpful in knowing what the legal, if there are legal dimensions to what you might be thinking about. So as always, the board is the one that needs to kind of set the lead on how to respond to these things. And if there is fraud going on, you definitely want to find it and stop it as soon as possible. So what's the shortcut way of knowing if you're living up to your duty of care? You got to be paying attention. The next duty we talk about is the duty of loyalty. We are busy people these days, although busy in a different way given the pandemic. We wear lots of hats in life, but when you are on a board, there is one hat and only one hat that you can be wearing, and that is the one that is constantly thinking about what's in the best interest of the organization. It can never be about how you can use your board position to be involved in decisions that help create additional business for your company, that does favors for your friends or elevates your own status in the community in some way. So we deal with that generally through conflict of interest policies. Now, here's how it often works. There are lots of conflict of interest policies, samples of those online. The IRS has some. If you Google it, you will find no end of suggested language or forms for that. Often there's a form that you ask board members to complete each year in which they will list their place of employment, where other people in their household work, maybe if there's other boards that they serve on, or maybe unique ownership issues. So if your family owns all of the downtown real estate in your town, maybe you note that, particularly if the organization is going to be looking to relocate. So you have these forms, and it just is a way to spark awareness on the part of board members about the ways that their personal lives intersect with the business life of the charity. And what we want to have happen is that when situations arise in the boardroom that intersect with personal interest, we want to make sure that the people voting on an issue don't have some other interest in the outcome of that decision. So let's say that the new Anywhere Boosters group wants to build this new band shell for the football games and the new marching band. So they're going to submit throughout the community requests for proposals to construction firms about building this band shell. I'm on the board. I own Beth's Builders. My company decides it wants to submit a proposal in response to this request for proposals. So when this issue comes up to the board, where they're going to go through the various proposals they have received, I'm going to say before this discussion starts, pardon me, but I have a conflict of interest on this issue. I'm going to leave the room. Make sure the minutes of the meeting say that Beth left the room. The minutes are the record of the meeting, and when conflict of interest issues come up, they don't come up next week. It's often months down the line, and that way people don't have to scratch their head and say, I think she left the room. Make sure it's in the minutes, then there's no question. I leave the room, and then the remaining board members can have a very candid discussion about the relative merits of all of the proposals that have been submitted. So if I'm in the room, Sue, who's on the board, may feel a real pressure, first of all, to give me the contract just because she knows me and likes me, or actually she may think that my company does terrible work and she might not feel free doing that, sharing that information if I'm giving her the evil eye. So I leave the room so that everyone can have a candid discussion about what's in the best interest of the group. So they go through all the proposals. It may well be that my proposal is the best one on the table. My company has been very, very supportive of school-related activities throughout the county. I'm known to do good quality work. There's no reason not to give it to me. Mine is just for the cost of goods. And so the remaining board members, without my influence, vote, and indeed they decide to give the contract to Beth's Builders. It's not until that that item is completed, that I re-enter the room, and then the minutes should say that I came back for the next agenda item on the board. So there will be conflicts that pop up, and some people get nervous about that. Unless you have people on your board who live under rocks, you will have conflicts, and the frequency of conflicts are going to increase as the size of your community decreases. That's been our experience. So the issue isn't that you have a conflict, the issue is what do you do about it? And so what we want to see is an environment in which board members say, time out, let's talk about this. And so again, having a conflict is no big deal at all. It's what you do about it that matters. Third duty to maintain accounts. This should be kind of a no-brainer. We expect boards to keep records, to do budgeting, and to track what's going on with the organization. So what we want to see are records of money that's coming in and money that's going out. We want to see budgets. We want to see reports to the board in which they're monitoring what's going on. When you get these financial reports that oftentimes staff members have put together for you, you ought to be looking for some key things. You know, how are you doing in terms of projections that are represented in your budget? If you see that the utility costs are way higher than projected, if you're like me in my household, I'm going to start asking questions. You need to do the same thing on the board. Maybe there is a great answer to that question. Well, everyone knows that we had a rough winter and everyone's utility costs were more expensive. Maybe it raises questions that you need to do something in response to. Maybe you need to explore other providers. Or maybe there's no good answer for this and you need to dig a bit deeper, and that may be where someone is doing damage to your organization, hiding it as a utility expense, for instance. So when you see things that don't make sense or that are out of whack with what you guessed, you may need to do something about it. So for instance, if you're a small organization and you adopted a budget in the end of 2019 for the year 2020, and you were planning 2 major fundraisers for the year and you had to cancel one of them because we couldn't have gatherings, which happened to far too many charities, you need to do something about it. You need to respond. Just like if I want to, you know, I may want to take my family every year to Disney World for spring break, but if the Attorney General decides I can stand a 20% cut in my salary, I need to do one of two things. Either I need to get a second job to add more income on this side of the ledger, or I need to cut costs and not take my family to Disney World. Charities have to do the same thing. So if you didn't raise how much you had projected in a particular fundraising event, maybe you need to come up with a third fundraising event for the year to make up for the difference. Or maybe you need to cut expenses on the other side and not do some of those things that you had projected your ability to do in terms of providing programming. And those are tough decisions. And this coronavirus time has certainly put a lot of pressure on board members to make all kinds of difficult decisions. For some, depending on the type of your organization, there may well have been increased demand for services, just like whoever we had on from the domestic violence world, hunger assistance, all those kinds of things. The needs for services during the pandemic has greatly increased. And at the same time, some of the regular donors to organizations have found themselves in economically tricky situations. They might have lost jobs. So this has been a perfect storm for many organizations. So it is tough times, but these are the things that you need to be really strategic about, especially now. So we expect boards to be paying attention to money coming in, money going out. And I mentioned again, job number one, make sure you have internal control systems and checks and balances so that those resources that you worked so hard to generate indeed get used for the purpose that you put all that energy into. Internal controls should not rest during the pandemic. In fact, you may need to make sure that you don't need to adopt some new ones. So we expect there to be records. If we get complaints about an organization, we may well want to see some of your financial reports to make sure the board is paying attention to those issues. Records retention policies. Think about all the various kinds of information that some charities may have. You may have employee information. You may have donor information. You may have volunteer information. You may have client information. And all of that information is often private information that you would never want shared with the public. So for that reason, unfortunately, we have to talk about cybersecurity issues. There are cyber criminals who are out there just looking for any weaknesses in systems that they can find. This is something we have to be aware of in our business lives, in our charity lives, and in our family lives. Some people think that charities are immune from being a target for cyber criminals, that they're only looking for big corporations. Not at all the case. In fact, I had a training earlier this week where someone shared that they had lost $8,000 in a cyber attack. We have some training materials on our webpage about cybersecurity issues. There's a webinar, there's a publication about protecting your information. So make sure that people that handle your information are doing so in a wise information. Make sure you know what information you have, how it's kept. Maybe you don't need to keep it as long and it's just safer to get rid of. So unfortunately, know that cybersecurity is something that we have to be mindful of in all of our activities, whether they're home finances or charitable finances. And let me just, is there anyone on the call here who's been involved with cyber crime at all? It is a tricky situation, and unfortunately, the criminals get absolutely very smart and clever in the way that they find access coming as a way to sneak their way into your system, sometimes take control of it, sometimes offer for the payment of a ransom to give you back control of your system. So be very mindful, and there's lots of resources out there, including on our webpage. So make sure you know about cybersecurity and protecting what you have, both at home and with the charity. And then the final duty we talk about is duty of compliance. And we expect board members to make sure that the organization is living up to its legal obligations. And we're going to touch a little bit on federal and state obligations that you have. Important thing to note, governing documents. So the Anywhere Booster Group has bylaws. You may call them regulations, constitution. They go by many ways, and they break down and explain how the organization is going to operate. So if the bylaws say that every April there's going to be an annual meeting of the membership, and that a nominating committee in March will put together a slate of candidates for the board and officers that will be approved at that membership meeting, get that on the planning calendar. Make sure it happens. You are legally obligated to live up to what you have in those bylaws. That's how the public is led to understand how the group is going to be run. If it no longer makes sense to have a annual meeting in April, change your bylaws. But until you do, you are legally obligated to follow what's in your bylaws, which is why I suggest that at the beginning of every program year, every board member take a look at the bylaws. What is it you've promised the public you're going to do, and is it on the planning calendar for when it's going to take place? You may well have agreements or contracts that are in place that you need to comply with. And indeed, if you make promises in the materials that you use in solicitations and raising funds, you must follow them. So if you raise money to build the gazebo for the marching band, then that's what you got to do with that money, and not use it for a cat shelter or something like that. Under federal law, I shared that they expect a 990 to be filed every year. The IRS expects all of these board governance issues to be complied with. I mentioned that there are federal obligations about whistleblower protection. There's one other item that was in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was adopted 15 years ago or so to address fraudulent activities in publicly traded companies. Two provisions apply to charities. One is the whistleblower. The other is if you're under federal investigation, don't destroy the documents. I also should mention, in case you have not noticed, this is a big election year. Charities are prohibited from making endorsements of candidates or making contributions to candidates' campaign funds. So I like to remind people that charities shouldn't be doing politics, the R&D kind, like Republican and Democrat, that's involved with candidacy. However, that doesn't mean that you don't have a role to play in public policy discussions. If the local city council is considering making changes to the way it handles domestic violence cases, a domestic violence shelter may be a great source of expertise to provide to policymakers about what the impact of their changes might mean for victims. Would it be a good change or a bad change? There's a lot of expertise in charities. You are perfectly free to share those sorts of things. The IRS has some good information at irs.gov about limitations and a further explanation about political activities, but stay away from the R&D kind. Do not write checks, do not endorse candidates, but use your expertise and share it when it comes to public policy matters. With state law, we've talked about the registration filing in my office. We've talked about the ongoing responsibilities with the Secretary of State's office. And then depending on what you do in your organization, if you have employees, you have the same obligations as any other employer to worry about Social Security, unemployment, workers' comp, those sorts of things. If you're providing food services through a soup kitchen, you may well need to know about health department regulations. If you provide health-related information, the board's going to want to know about HIPAA and the ways that you're making sure that you're complying with those obligations that come because of the activities you do. And so the job of being a board member is never done because you constantly need to be thinking strategically, watching out for how to refine your activities to be more effective, more efficient, to evaluate whether your programs make a difference. Should they be tweaked? Should you develop new programs? Maybe poverty has been solved and it no longer exists in your community and the community soup kitchen is no longer needed. Wouldn't that be a dream come true? So boards always need to be asking questions and taking a look at the big picture. And so the job is never done. And while we talked about some of the ways that things can go wrong with charities, I hope that what you heard was a lot of common sense. And it's the sort of thing that we just need to periodically check in on and remind ourselves, and perhaps it stimulates an idea for something that we should be doing differently or doing better. And so that's what, the Cleveland Clinic is never done doing board governance, neither is the Grandmother's Reading Group board members. So the board has this unique role to really make a difference in their communities through the way that their charitable organizations live out their commitment to their cause. Heather, I wondered if this could be a good time to take a break before we come back and talk about some specific fundraising issues that board members and charitable organizations should be aware of.
Great, let's do that. Beth, what do you think? 10 minutes maybe, does that work?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, so how about, my clock says 10:44, but let's just call it 10:45. So we can reconvene at 5 minutes to 11, 10:55. All of you I know are seasoned Zoom people, but I would encourage you to get up, walk around, get a drink, do something, because it just is really hard staying in your seat. So we will see you back here at 10:55. All right, everyone, 10:55, welcome back. And Beth, if you want to take it away.
I want to introduce to you one of my colleagues who is going to run through some of the considerations that folks need to be mindful of in the fundraising arena. Abby has been with our office for, Abby, I don't remember when you started, but she at this point, I think, is our most senior lawyer on staff. And she handles a broad range of activities in our office and is an all-around good egg. So please welcome and get to know my friend, Abby Jacobs.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Beth. I've been in the section since 2012, which seems sort of bananas at this point. It does not seem like it's been that long. And I'm actually not the most senior attorney in the section, so, but getting close, which also seems sort of crazy. I still often feel like I'm like, I don't know, just out of law school, 25 years old. But I guess I'm not, so. Okay, so we're gonna chat about fundraising, which includes charitable gaming. And some of what is covered in this presentation is also covered in the board governance presentation that Beth gave, because obviously board governance issues deal with fundraising. They're intertwined, of course. So there will be a little bit of repetition, but I figure it can't hurt to hear things a couple times, right? Especially if it's new. So we're just going to dive into some fundraising discussions. If you have any questions, just shout them out. You can put them in the chat if you prefer. I know most people prefer that, but feel free to just talk over me. Let's pretend like we're in the room together and having this discussion, because doing webinars is weird. I don't know if you've conducted a webinar, but it's very weird to talk at a computer and to not be able to really see people or interact with them. So it's not my favorite thing. And unlike Beth, I'm an introvert. I'm not at all an extrovert, but still I find this all to be very strange to sit in my own house and do this. So, okay, let's talk about fundraising. Well, and I'll start with, we are very aware that fundraising always is hard, right? Often it's something that charities focus a lot of time and attention on and struggle with. Getting people to give you money is something that's not always easy to do, and it's something that you often need to do to keep the charitable programming going. But it's especially hard right now. You often now cannot do the fundraisers that you had planned to do because they involve gathering in person. And so charities are having to come up with new ways to fundraise, new ways to get money, new ways to reach out to their constituents. And so it's especially important now, I think, more than ever, to know what the rules are, what the requirements are, what kinds of things you should be thinking about to make sure that you're doing things the right way and you're not getting in trouble, particularly at a time when you can't afford to be dealing with legal issues, right? Not that you ever want to be dealing with that, but especially now. So Beth talked a bit about some of our statutes, and the main one we're going to focus on here is 1716, which is our Solicitation Act. So this is the statute you'll want to look to if you're thinking about asking for money or anything of value for a charitable purpose. This is the statute. Under the statute, in addition to the rules for fundraising, there's also the registration requirements for charities, and that includes charities that are not located in Ohio. So if a charity is located outside of Ohio but is soliciting Ohioans coming into Ohio and asking Ohioans for money, they also have to register under the statute. And there's also registration requirements under the statute for professional fundraisers. We'll talk a bit about them as well. But let's talk a little bit about what even does any of this mean? What do these words mean? What is charitable solicitation? So solicitation is very, very broad. And basically what it means, if you ask for anything of value and you represent that it'll be used for a charitable purpose or it will benefit a charitable organization, that's a charitable solicitation. So that includes all sorts of things. The statute lays out some of them, but like if you're having a spaghetti dinner, that's a charitable solicitation. If you're having a bake sale, if you're having a gala, if you're going door to door and asking for money, right? If you're asking for something of value for charitable purpose organization, that's a charitable solicitation. That means you have to follow all of these laws, you have to register, all that kind of stuff. Unless, of course, you're exclusively religious, as Beth discussed. Okay, so what's a charitable organization? A charitable organization is a 501c3. If you are a 501c3, you are a charitable organization. Easy peasy, you know you are. What if you're not a 501c3? There are organizations that are not 501c3s that are also charitable organizations. If you hold yourself out to be established for a charitable purpose, if you're employing a charitable appeal, there's charitable solicitation going on, you're a charitable organization, and that's not limited to tax exempt organizations. So, sorry, this thing is very finicky. If you are a 501c4, for example, you could be charitable, but maybe you just don't want to get tax exempt status, or you haven't gotten around to it or whatever. That doesn't matter. You don't have to get tax exempt status with the IRS. You can just be sort of a mom and pop organization that never reaches out to the IRS, never seeks tax exempt status. That doesn't matter, right? You're still charitable if you're doing these things. And charitable purpose is defined in the statute also super broadly. So you can see that it includes all of these things: benevolent, philanthropic, patriotic, educational, civic, even some things you might not think of as charitable traditionally. It's very broadly defined here. So Beth has already talked about registration, and you can find all sorts of information about registration on our website. There's a webinar once a month on registration if you have questions, or if you want to learn more, or pick up the phone and call us, or email us, I guess, today. You're more likely to reach us by email since we're all working from our houses, but send an email to the charitable registration email. They will help you. It's their job to help you. They're very, very good at it. If you find that you're in the process of registering and you get to a part and it's not working, or you don't understand what you're supposed to put there or whatever, just reach out. They'll help you. They'll walk you through step by step. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to get this registration stuff done. Okay. And I know Beth talked about the Research Charities page, but if you are thinking about conducting a fundraiser and partnering with another organization, or you just want to check your own registration status, or you're thinking about donating to a charity that solicited you for funds, go check them out, right? Go on our website, put in their EIN or put in their name, and see if they're registered. Look at what their numbers look like, right? How much money are they bringing in? How much are they using on programming? Is this the kind of organization you want to work with or donate to? Maybe you look at their numbers and you realize they're registered, so that's great, they're compliant, but as it turns out, they're only using 5% of the money they get on their charitable programming. Maybe that's not where you want to give your money. Maybe that's not the kind of organization you want to partner with and use your charitable name and your charity's reputation with that organization. So a lot of valuable information there. And every year we get more and more information. The information becomes more robust. So check that out. And so I mentioned that anyone who's soliciting Ohioans has to register in Ohio. The same applies if you are soliciting outside of the state. So I think you're all located around Toledo, meaning you're located near borders. Maybe you are soliciting into Michigan, for example. Maybe that makes sense for you to do. They're close, they're, right there. If you are doing that, just know that you might have to register in those states too, right? You might also need to register in Michigan. You might need to comply with their laws. So just know if you're crossing a border, that's something you need to think about. And here's some other important things that are in 1716. There's a lot of stuff in there. And there's a lot of stuff that you'll find probably doesn't apply to your situation. But here are some things that I think always apply. Here are some things you cannot do. You cannot deceive the public when you're making a solicitation, right? That seems pretty obvious. You cannot mislead them as to any material fact. That also seems pretty obvious. But something that I guess is less obvious is that you can't solicit without, you can't solicit for a charity without their written consent. And that's the same for, obviously, for individuals soliciting for your charity. They actually need your written consent before they can fundraise on your behalf. So that's something you really want to make sure you're paying attention to. And know who's using your name, know who's using your logos, know who's conducting fundraisers on your behalf, because your charity's reputation is yours to protect, right? You're the only one really who can do that. Some other important things that are in 1716. Well, and I'll just mention real fast, I don't know where the chat is. I could see it when Beth was presenting, but now I can't see the chat function. So Beth or Heather or anyone, if you see that there's a question, can you just shout it out to me because I can't see it anymore. It's very confusing. Okay, so other important provisions in 1716 to know about. If you're soliciting for a charitable purpose, if you're conducting any sort of fundraiser, you have fiduciary duties related to that money, to those solicitations. So Beth talked about your fiduciary duties in the last presentation. All of those apply, not just to board members, right, but to officers, to anyone, even sometimes to volunteers who are just volunteering on behalf of the charity. If you're holding that money for a charitable purpose, right, you collected it, you're holding it, you have to act in a fiduciary capacity with respect to that money. And then the last thing that's important to note is that you must maintain solicitation records for at least 3 years. And so often we talk about how long you need to keep records. Some records you need to keep forever. Some records you can get rid of immediately. And it's often unclear how long you're supposed to keep those records that fall in between that, right? But as far as solicitation records go, you need to keep them for at least 3 years. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different kinds of fundraising. And of course, there are many more than this. As technology changes, as people come up with new ideas, as things like pandemics happen and folks are forced to come up with new ways to conduct fundraisers, there are inevitably things we haven't thought about. There are things that the law hasn't thought about, the law hasn't covered. But these are the types of fundraisers that we're going to talk about today, knowing that there are many other types of fundraisers that might come up. And so if you have questions about other types of fundraisers that aren't on this, please ask me. And in the future, if you have questions, you can send Beth an email, or you're welcome to email me, and we can chat about them, because I find that the questions we get from constituents are almost always related to fundraising. I mean, I'd say 75% of the questions we get are fundraising questions. And of that, a significant portion of those are charitable gaming questions, which we're going to dive into a bit. And so there are lots of questions that surround these types of events, so feel free to ask them. We would like to help you. We cannot actually provide legal advice, but we can point you in the right direction and hopefully get you on your way. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is special events. Special events are things like galas or big dinners or whatever. Special events are costly. Special events take a long time to plan. Special events often cost a lot to put on. And so that's something you need to think about. Is this worth it for us to do, right? We're going to spend a lot of time and money planning the special event. How much money are we going to get in return? Is it worth it? Maybe it is worth it because the point of that special event is a little bit to raise money, but mostly to get your name out there, mostly for the community to know you're there. If that's the case, a special event is probably a really great thing for you to do. But if the point is to just make money, a special event might not be the way to do it. Another fundraiser might be what you want to focus on. One thing you'll need to think about is, do you know what % of the ticket or sales proceeds will actually benefit the charity? So if you're putting on the special event, do you know, or after the fact, can you provide that information to folks, because folks might ask those questions? And if you're attending a special event, that's a question you might want to think about asking, right? Is it worthwhile for me to go to this event if most of the money isn't even going to benefit the charity? Could I just write them a check and not waste my time going to this? There are a couple income tax returns or income tax issues to think about. Donors cannot deduct the portion of an event ticket used for meals and other services. So if you're planning the event, that's something important for you to know. You need to know what portion of that ticket price is actually used to pay for the meal and what's used for the charitable part, so that you can tell folks so that they know which part is deductible and which part is not. The same goes for raffle tickets. The purchase of raffle tickets is not deductible. So that's just something that's good to know if you're putting on the event, but particularly if you're attending an event and buying raffle tickets, or you've paid for a ticket that it partially covers your meal. Okay, canisters, vending machines, and donation bins. So we've all seen these donation bins, right? They're in parking lots all over the place. What you may or may not know about these bins is that most of the time, I'd say, they're owned by for-profit entities. Sometimes there's no charity associated with them at all. Or sometimes there is a charity associated, and the charity's getting very little of the money, or maybe the charity's getting a great deal. Sometimes these are actually run by a charity. Goodwill has their own bins. Salvation Army has their own bins. But this is just, I guess, a bit of a PSA that we often donate our clothes thinking they're going to charity, right? We go and put them in the bin and we think they're going to go to a good place. And a lot of the time, those bins aren't actually doing anything charitable, or doing very little charitable with the clothes and shoes that they get. But maybe you don't care, right? Sometimes you just want to get rid of the stuff. Maybe that's not why you're doing it. But that's just a thing to know about those bins. But there's other things to know about those bins. And that's if an entity approaches you saying, do you want to do this fundraiser with us, right? Do you want to have your name on our bin, and we'll just give you some of the money, right? We're going to collect the clothes, we're going to sell the clothes, we're going to get a little bit of money, and we'll give you some of it. And that's not a big deal for you, right? You don't need to do anything. You just give them the written permission to use your name or whatever. So definitely you need to like read through those contracts and know what they say, and be clear what's going on. But there are some things to know about these bins, and that's that one, they're big and they're heavy, and sometimes these entities drop them off in the parking lot of a Walmart, for example, without Walmart's permission. Or sometimes they drop them off in a parking lot with the permission of the business, but then they sort of leave it there abandoned, and they don't move it, and they don't do what they're supposed to do, and they don't empty it on time and whatever. And your charity's name is now attached to that bin, but you can't move because it's big and it's giant. And maybe it's there illegally, or maybe it's not being taken care of. So this applies to everything we talk about, right? It could apply to a little canister sitting on the counter of a restaurant, right? If it has your charity's name on it, you want to know what's going on with it. You want to have given permission. You want to be thoughtful about it. You maybe want to have a contract. So those are just things to think about with respect to those kinds of fundraising types. Oh, I found the chat section. Okay. Okay, sorry. Let's see, what's next? Door-to-door solicitations and street collections. So everybody knows about these, right? They've been going on forever. I personally love when the Girl Scouts come to my door, and I don't love when basically anyone else comes to my door. But I'm here for the cookies. So if you're thinking about conducting a door-to-door solicitation, or the street collections, like when the firefighters are out in the street with their boots, what you need to do is you need to check the local jurisdictions to see if there are any registration or licensing requirements. Sometimes charities need to register, but they don't need a license. Sometimes they need both, sometimes they need neither. There are often different rules and requirements for charitable groups than there are for for-profit entities. It seems like all the time someone's coming to our door trying to sell us pest control. I don't know if they think there are just like a lot of pests in my neighborhood, but like all the time folks are coming around doing those kinds of solicitations. But I know that the registration and licensing requirements for those entities are different than they are for charities. So you'll just want to log on to your city's or your township's website, if they have a website, or call them up and just find out what the requirements are. And of course, I know Beth talked about internal controls, especially for handling cash. This is something that might come up with door-to-door solicitation. So if you are going around selling cookies, Often folks are going to give you cash for those cookies, and now potentially random volunteers have cash that belongs to your charity. So you need to have rules and requirements and policies about how they handle that, what they do. Maybe you want to make sure that there are 2 people going to every door, so it's not just one person going around and pocketing that cash. There are all sorts of policies that you could put in place. That's up to you. It depends on what works for you, but know that that's something to think about in these types of fundraisers. Cause-related marketing. So this is something you see often, that a charity is partnering with a for-profit entity to conduct some sort of fundraiser. And there are all sorts of issues that that might come up with this, but also they're often very good things to do. So here, there are some examples that YoPlay had you mail in the lids. When you bought the YoPlay, you would take off the lid and you'd mail it in, and then a certain amount of money would go to a breast cancer organization. And the issue in that case was that YoPlay wasn't clear that there was a cap on that. So folks were collecting all these lids and sending them in thinking that every lid they sent was money to the charity, but that wasn't actually the case. At some point, there was a cap on that they didn't tell anyone about. And so that's not a particularly big issue, but that's just something to think about. If you're going to partner with a for-profit business, just know what's going to happen. Is there a cap? And then let donors know that, or make sure that the for-profit entity is letting donors know that, because transparency is very important. That comes up sometimes, I think, with like Kroger, for example. Not that there's any concerns with Kroger, but often they're doing like the roundup, or they're selling like the little hearts or like clovers or whatever that you can put your name on and put on the wall. I grew up in a small town, so that kind of stuff happened a lot. Maybe you want to make sure that Kroger employees have the information to tell donors what's happening with the funds. Maybe you don't, but you should know what those contracts say, and you should just be ready to negotiate those contracts and know what to look for. And you should consider the reputation of the entities that you're partnering with. So I know Beth mentioned in her board governance training that if you are an organization that helps folks with substance abuse, maybe you don't want to partner with a liquor company, right? Or a tobacco company, for example. Or maybe you do, that's up to you. But you want to think about how the entity's reputation might work with your charity's reputation if you're going to partner with them. Get everything in writing. That's just a good idea anyway. Planned giving. So planned giving comes about a lot when someone says, I'm going to put in my will, in my trust, that when I die, X amount of dollars goes to this charity, right? So that happens all the time. Sometimes that happens and the charity knows it's happening, right? Sometimes the charity is involved in that transaction. Someone comes to you ahead of time, meets with you, says, I'm going to do this. Are you cool with this? Are you on board? Whatever. But often the charity doesn't know, right? So say I die and I put in my will when I die that I want X dollars to go to my local food bank. I probably haven't talked to my local food bank about that, right? And so the local food bank just gets a check from me. And maybe I put a restriction on those donations. And the food bank says, I don't want that money, right? Or maybe they want the money, who knows? But maybe the restriction is like a restriction that's particularly hard to deal with or problematic, or like Beth mentioned, maybe I leave to the food bank my car. Well, maybe the food bank does not want my car, has no need for my car. Now they're in a situation where they need to sell my car to get the money for it, or deal with all sorts of issues related to that. So those are just things to think about. Do we want to accept these restrictions? Do we not? Are we sophisticated enough? Are we big enough that we can have folks on staff who can help individuals do this kind of estate planning? and include us in it or not? Is that something we don't want to be involved in? Those are things to think about. And I think Beth mentioned this, but I'm not positive. It is possible to get out of restriction. So if you have funds that you've had around for a long time and the restriction becomes impossible or impractical, it's possible to get out of that restriction through either the probate court or potentially through our office. So if that's something that comes up, you can reach out to us and ask us how to go about that. Sales, we mentioned before, bake sales, magazine sales, overpriced wrapping paper. I have vivid memories of selling very expensive wrapping paper when I was in elementary school and I think middle school that nobody wanted, right? All sorts of these fundraisers, it seems, often are things that people don't really want. And that leads to something that I had never thought about before until one of my coworkers mentioned it to me, which is from the side of the donor, right? If someone comes to my door and says, do you want to buy this wrapping paper that costs $30 when really you could get it for $5 in the store? Maybe I say, yes, I want to support you, so cool, I'll do it. Or maybe I say, no, can I just like write you a check for $30 so that you get to keep all $30 and I don't get this wrapping paper I don't need? It never occurred to me that that's a thing that I could do. I don't think it ever occurred to my parents that they could just say, no, we don't want this stuff, let's just give you money. But that's something, oh no, come back. That's something from the donor perspective that I thought was interesting that I never thought about, but it's also something from the charity side to think about. What if someone says that to one of your volunteers who went door to door and is selling something, right? Do you have a process in place that allows that person to accept that money? That's something to think about, right? Because I think when I was in high school going door to door selling stuff for the athletic boosters, right? And someone said to me, I don't want to buy that card, but can I just give you $30? I think I would have said, no, I have no idea how I would go about accepting money from you. But that might be something that you want to think about if you're doing these kinds of fundraisers from the charity perspective. And then consider who you're working with, right? So don't conduct a fundraiser with a wrapping paper company that then never gives the wrapping paper, or it's not good quality or whatever. Think about that kind of stuff, of course. And then of course you'll need to think about any like tax or health regulations that are involved. So we'll talk a little bit more about the tax issues on the next slide, but if you're conducting a bake sale, are there health regulations you need to think about? There might be, there might not be, but that's something that you'll want to look into. And taxes, everyone's favorite subject. There are questions related to sales tax if you're conducting these kinds of fundraisers. And one of those questions that comes up is, do we need to collect sales tax on items we sell as a fundraiser? So the statute when I looked at is 5739.02, so you can go read it. It's pretty boring as you'd think a section on sales tax would be. But here's what you need to know. If your nonprofit is going to engage in sales for only 6 days or less in a year, you don't need to collect sales tax. You're off the hook. If it's going to be more than 6 days, you do need to pay sales tax or start collecting sales tax on that or paying it. There is an exception. There is no day limit if you're conducting sales for primary or secondary schools, PTOs, booster groups, or otherwise on behalf of a primary secondary school. So there's specific language about what that exception is. But if you don't meet those exceptions, you're not primary, secondary school, PTO, booster group, whatever, you are limited to 6 days before you need to actually collect sales tax. And so you can call the division with any special questions about how that works. We certainly would not be able to help you with that. I couldn't begin to tell you what to do. I can just tell you that's what the law is, and you should call them if you have questions. Or you could always hire private counsel or talk to a CPA or something like that. Okay, technology, social media, and online fundraising. Oh, for goodness sakes. Okay. Here's something you might want to do. you might want to Google your charity's name. If you've never done it, it's a good thing to do. I don't know if you guys have ever Googled your own name. I've done that before just to see what's out there on me. You should do the same with your charity. You should Google your charity's name, see what's out there. And here's the thing that happens. There are online platforms that, and there are many of these, that will take all of the names of all of the charities from the IRS and just load them into their website and say, you can solicit on behalf of any of these charities, right? Meaning that there are all sorts of websites on which somebody could donate to your organization and you would have no idea. They're using your name. Your name is out there. Many of them aren't actually soliciting on behalf of your charity. Your charity's name is listed there, but there's no way to give to a charity that hasn't accepted the profile, made the profile, set it up, whatever. But there are some that are soliciting on your behalf without your knowledge. And as we discussed, they actually need your written permission to solicit on your behalf. So if you find that your name is on one of these or many of these websites and you don't want it to be, reach out to them and tell them to take it down. They must take it down. That's just a good idea to control your name and your reputation, because you have the right to control how your name and your brand is used. I know Beth already talked about cybersecurity, so I won't dive into that. But you do want to make sure that if you have an online donate option, that you're using some sort of secure system. That it has the HTTPS : on it. The S means secure. And then you want to do research. So often online solicitations, online fundraising gets sort of a bad rap, but it can be very positive, especially right now, right? Because you can't really meet with people. It's a positive that you could solicit through the internet and use the internet to do your fundraisers and to implement your creative ideas. But here are some things you want to think about. What expenses will be deducted from contributions? So we're going to talk a little bit later about professional fundraisers and how they often keep a lot of the money, and very little of the money actually ends up going to charity. The opposite tends to be the case through online systems. So often when you work with a platform, an internet platform to help you conduct an online fundraiser, they take a pretty small percentage, like a 5% percentage or something, or like a couple dollars or something like that. So that's a positive for online fundraising, but it is also something you'll want to look at because they're not all the same. Every contract is different. So make sure you know how much of the money they're keeping. That comes up in I see often folks are using Facebook to conduct fundraisers on their birthdays, or charities use Facebook to conduct fundraisers. And it's important to check and see how much of the money Facebook actually keeps, if Facebook keeps any of the money. I mean, that's just good to know, right? It's also good to know if you're using some sort of platform or system, will donor data be protected? So a donor is going to give them their information or give you their information through the platform. Are they keeping that information? Do they own that information? Do you own that information? Is that information protected? Is it secure? Do they have any rights to do what they want with that information? Now I'm seeing the chat. Oh, great question. When you fundraise online, how do you know where to register if it goes across state line? The answer is that it's murky. It's not completely clear, and every state is different. So some states don't require registration at all. 39 states do. Ohio obviously does. So the answer is it depends, and the real answer is if you're not actively soliciting in another state, if you're not actively soliciting Michiganders, for example, you probably don't need to register in Michigan. But if you are actively reaching out into Michigan, if you're actively emailing them, if you know that your particular charity is located on the border and you know a bunch of Michiganders are going to donate to you, that's probably enough, right? But it's probably not the case if you just put a donate now button on your website and you're just telling your constituents who live in and around Ohio about it, that you're going to need to register in California, for example. right? Because even though someone from California could get on your website and press that donate now button, it's pretty unlikely that that's going to be the case, and you're not targeting them. But again, every state is different. I will say, if it were the case that someone were soliciting in Ohio and hadn't registered with us, and we found out, like so an out-of-state organization was soliciting in Ohio, and we determined that it was enough, right? It was repeated, or they were targeting Ohioans, or enough Ohioans had contributed to them that we think it triggers registration. All we do is tell them that they need to register. There's no like, you're in big trouble, right? It's just like, now we know that you're doing this. Now we've made you aware, and now you need to register. So that may be what happens, but it's not like a huge deal. Just know that you need to know that you might need to register in other organizations. But like I said, the laws haven't kept up with technology because they can't possibly. I'm sure you all know that getting a law changed is relatively complicated and takes a long time, but technology changes on a daily basis. So the law just hasn't kept up with everything. And so we all do the best we can to sort of figure out how the law applies to all of these new situations, including all of this online fundraising. One other question to think about with respect to if you're using an online platform is, how often are they going to give you the money? So do they give you, if you're raising money through a platform and say the platform is holding the money, do they give you the money immediately? Do they give you the money only when it reaches a certain amount? So if it never reaches the $200 limit they've set, do you never get the money? What happens to that money? Do they give you money weekly, monthly, whatever? That's something to think about. It's something that you may need to negotiate or to know. Raffles. Okay, raffles, I know Beth talked about, but are an important thing to talk about because they are one of the most common fundraisers. And the reason I think that they're one of the most common fundraisers done are, one, because they're relatively easy to set up and conduct, and two, there's no license or registration requirement for conducting a raffle. So if you want to conduct a raffle, conduct a raffle. If you want to conduct 30 raffles, conduct 30 raffles. There's no limit on how many you can do. There's no limit on how often you can conduct raffles. But there are limits on raffles, and that's limited to who can conduct a raffle. So you actually have to be either a 501c3 or a 501c 4, 7, 8, 10, or 19. And so that includes charities. Charities are the 501c3s, public schools, charter schools, vets, frats, sporting organizations. They may all conduct raffles. If you're a C3, you get to keep 100%, no big deal. I think you probably all are C3s on this call, and you can keep 100%, and that's your money, and you do with it what you want for your charitable purposes. If you're a C4, 7, 8, 10, or 19, and you conduct a raffle, you have to give 50% of the proceeds of that raffle to a 501c3 or a governmental entity. So they do get to conduct raffles, but they don't get to keep all of the money. Businesses and individuals may not conduct raffles. They do all the time, but it is illegal for them to do that. So, but charities can conduct raffles all they want. You should inquire about other regulations if there are unusual prizes. So if you're thinking about raffling guns, liquor, houses, land, cars, those kinds of things, there are likely special rules that apply, regulations that apply. So you should know what those are. We often get calls of folks saying, can I raffle a gun, or can I raffle alcohol? Yes, as far as charitable law is concerned with respect to raffles, but there might be a liquor law that says you can't do that, or there might be some sort of firearm law that says you can't do it. So know that you need to check that out too. Games of chance. Okay, this is where we usually get the most questions. This is where we get the most calls. And I know Beth covered it too, but I think this one is particularly important to talk about again, because it comes up so often and it is so confusing, and 2915 is a mess of a statute. So 2915, which includes all the charitable gaming and all the bingo stuff, was put into place before Ohio had casinos, before Ohio had racinos. And so it was put into place when there was the special carve out for gambling for charities and only for charities. And then, of course, lots of, as is always the case, right? Special interest groups come in and say, I want this carve out and I want this carve out. And then casinos come and then things change. And the statute has become pretty hard to read and understand. It's a pretty messy statute. And so if you're thinking about doing any sort of charitable gaming, I urge you to look at the statute. I urge you to check out, we have an AGO policy 201 that talks about games of chance. I urge you to call us. I urge you to talk to local law enforcement, because as Beth mentioned, it's a criminal statute. You don't want to get in trouble for doing this kind of stuff. And you can just pick up the phone and call your local law enforcement if you're thinking about conducting some sort of fundraising that you think might be charitable gaming, and ask them what they think about it, because they're the ones who are enforcing it. But okay, games of chance. Games of chance are things like poker, Monte Carlo nights, that kind of stuff. Often you see these at like a Catholic festival, for example, in the summer. These are happening. Who can conduct a game of chance? Only 501c3s. That's it. No other tax-exempt entity, unlike Raffles. No organization that is not 501c3 has not gotten tax-exempt status. No businesses, only C3s. And then there are super specific rules about where and when and how you can do that, which we'll talk about on the next slide. And particularly of interest is that no one can receive money for conducting salary, reward, tip, donation, gratuity, any of that, for conducting these kinds of games of chance. So if someone approaches your charity and says, hey, we can help you do this game of chance, we can help you do a poker night, we can sort of do everything for you, you just owe us this like small fee or whatever, you cannot do that. And the folks conducting the games of chance need to be volunteers of the organization or members of the organization, and they can't accept tips or donations or that kind of stuff. That's very clear in the statute. Lots of things aren't clear, but that one's clear. Okay, so here's the who, what, where, when, why of games of chance. Who, 501c3s, where? At festivals of a charity. So what does that mean? Often we think about it in like the Catholic festivals, right? Every summer they have festivals, often they're big deals, often they have these sorts of games of chance, they have bingo, they have all sorts of stuff going on. Raffles for car leases are becoming more common. Anything beyond what you have mentioned to be aware of? I don't think there's anything beyond what we discussed to be aware of, except that, no, I don't think so. I think it's all there, right? Think about, is that something you even want to deal with? Know what the contract says for the lease. No, I don't think there's anything special with respect to those, at least that I'm aware of. Beth might know something. She can chime in now or later if she does. But no, I don't think there's anything extra. Games of chance can be conducted at festivals, and there are specific rules about like what property they can be conducted on. So the charity has to have owned the property for a year, or property owned by the government, or property leased from a vet frat who's also owned it for a year, and not leased it 12 plus times during the year for charitable gaming. Okay, so they said there's like a lot of silly rules related to this, or not silly, but specific rules. And so I cannot tell you the amount of times we've gotten calls where folks called to say, this is what we're planning to do. We're having this fundraiser this weekend. We're having it at a hotel. We're ready to go. And then I have to say, okay, but you can't have it at a hotel because it doesn't meet any of these requirements. So just know what they are before you get everything all planned and then you realize you can't do it. The festivals, these kinds of games of chance can be conducted for fewer than 5 days in a calendar year only. So you can't do this a lot. You can't conduct it, oh no, during or within 10 hours of bingo. for amusement only, and all the money must go to the see-through governmental unit. Okay, so if you're thinking about doing it and you have questions, your best bet is to just pick up the phone and call and ask those questions. There are other charitable gaming issues, types that come up. Schemes of chance are always illegal. Slot machines, pools conducted for profit, they are always illegal under statute. Nobody can do them. Quarter auctions are also schemes of chance and are illegal. They happen all the time. All the time we get calls saying, but I did a quarter auction, but I'm doing a quarter auction, but we have one planned, but I just went to 5, but they happen every weekend. That may be the case, and does seem to be the case, but they are illegal always. Queen of Hearts and Knight of the Races, we get questions about these. Queen of Hearts have become pretty popular at bars. You see big signs at bars saying Queen of Hearts up to $1 million because the game can get very big. The price can get very big. Knight of the Races, same thing. We get questions about these, and both of them could be legal or could not be legal depending on how they're played. So there are AG opinions on our website on both of these issues. You can check them out if you're thinking about doing either of these things. And as Beth mentioned, for some reason, craps and roulette are always prohibited, except at casinos, but a whole separate thing. Beth talked to you about bingo, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but if you're thinking about bingo, check out our website. Maybe think about going, attending a bingo school webinar or in-person training. They're very valuable. Professional fundraisers. I'm also not going to spend a bunch of time talking about professional fundraisers, even though the statute spends a lot of time on them. What you need to know is that professional fundraisers need to register with us, that they have to pay a bond, that they file solicitation notices and financial reports with us. Most of this is for you to know from the donor end. If you're thinking about hiring a professional fundraiser, you'll really want to dive into the details of all of this. But from a donor perspective, when you get a call, there are things that you want to think about. They often use deceptive pitches. Sometimes they raise funds for non-existent or sham charities. Sometimes they create charities themselves to benefit from those funds raised. They often keep a lot. Oh yes, what's the definition of a professional fundraiser? Good question. So it's someone who for money is soliciting for charity. And so you can typically think of them as the folks who are doing the telemarketing. That's often how we think of them, right? So a charity hires a telemarketer to call a list of donors and ask them to donate to their charity. Sometimes it's like a direct mail campaign. So with a direct mail campaign, you maybe hire a company to send out mailings asking for solicitations. That's correct, it's not a staff member. So volunteers of organizations, staff members of organizations are not professional solicitors. Obviously you're getting paid for working as a staff member for the charity, and you might, as part of that, conduct a fundraiser or call people and ask them for money. That doesn't make you a professional solicitor. These are separate, typically for-profit entities that partner with charities to conduct fundraising. And that's an important thing to know, because we sometimes get questions from folks saying, do I need to register as a professional solicitor as a staff member or volunteer for an organization? And you don't, right? As long as you're a member of the organization or volunteer, you're not a professional solicitor. But if you get a call from a professional solicitor, what you need to know is they need to tell you that they're a professional solicitor, what their name is, who they're soliciting for. And if you ask them, they have to tell you what percentage goes to charity. So I often ask what percentage goes to charity. If you ask, I think 2 or 3 questions or so, they'll eventually hang up on you, inevitably, I found. Beth asks lots of questions when she gets calls and then files complaints. That's something you can do for us and to help protect the charitable sector. If something seems fishy when someone calls you, get the information you can get and file a complaint with our office. That would be very helpful to us. But if you're thinking about hiring a professional fundraiser, talk with multiple, get bids, just like you do for your housing projects, right? You don't, or maybe you do, but it's probably best practice not to hire the first painter who you talk to, but maybe talk to 3 painters, get quotes from them, see who seems best. If you're going to use a professional solicitor, make sure you are reviewing and approving all the scripts and materials. That's the same with like if you're hiring fundraising counsel or anyone who's going to help you and prepare materials with you or for you. Make sure you're reviewing everything and you're approving everything because it has your charity's name on it. You'll want to know who owns the donor list. So does the professional solicitor own those donor lists? Can they use them then for other charities? Are they theirs to call those individuals? Do you own them? Or can you at least access them if you wanted to reach out to donors in the future? That's all good information to know. Be cautious of long-term contracts and extensions. So if you, this is the case not just with professional solicitors, but if you're partnering with someone and they say this contract lasts for 10 years, maybe don't sign that contract and renegotiate because you know, a lot can change in that time. Okay. So here are just some tips that we've talked about, most of them, I think, but let's just re-highlight them. Check with local jurisdictions to see if you can solicit in your town, in your township, in your county, whatever. Internet presence, Google your name, make sure that nobody's raising funds on your behalf without your written consent. Regulatory requirements, know if there are health restrictions, know if you need to pay taxes or don't need to pay taxes. Cost, we talked about that, but obviously all charities have administrative and fundraising expenses. That's part of running the charity, but be wary if those costs are outweighing the amount of money you're spending on the mission. So if you're spending 75% of your money on overhead, on your building, on salaries, on that kind of stuff, and only 25% is actually supporting the mission of the charity, maybe you need to reevaluate how you're doing things. That is probably not the best practice, although in some situations could be okay. It really is fact dependent. We talked about restrictions. One thing we didn't talk about with respect to restrictions is what you say when you're conducting a fundraiser. So when you're conducting a solicitation and you tell folks that you're going to use those funds for a very specific purpose, say to build a cat shelter in your backyard, right? Or in the backyard of the charity. If you then realize that you didn't raise enough money to do that, or you've changed your mind, or that's no longer what you want to do, you're sort of boxed in, right? Because that's what you told folks you were going to do with the money, and you cannot deceive donors, and you cannot make material misrepresentations about your solicitations, as we talked about before. So what should you do? If you find yourself in that situation, what you really need to do is go back to donors and somehow let them know that you're not going to use the money for what you said you were going to use the money for, and can you use the money for a different purpose, ask for permission, somehow get their okay, or do they want the money back, right? But a way to avoid that is to not solicit for such a specific purpose, or to have caveats with your fundraisers. So say, we're fundraising to build a cat shelter, but if we don't get enough money, we're going to use the money for X purpose, right? Or we're just fundraising for our general charitable purposes. That way you can use the money for any purpose you need to use it for. And you don't run into those situations where you need to try to contact donors and go back to them, because that can be complicated and messy. And frankly, it doesn't look very good. And often the charity's reputation is what matters the most. There are IRS issues connected with fundraising. We've talked a lot about them, but here are a couple more that we haven't mentioned. If someone gives you a gift of $250 or more, in order to deduct the contribution, you have to give them written confirmation. So there's no like real rules about what that written confirmation or that receipt or acknowledgement must look like, but you do need to give them something in writing. And frankly, it's just good practice for any gifts and donations you get to send a written acknowledgement of some sort. That helps donors feel good about the donation they've given. It helps you maintain communications. It's just a good practice anyway. non-cash contributions. So unless you have a really good, reliable way of valuing those contributions, don't try to value them, right? Don't give them a receipt with a value on it. That just gets messy. It's why when you donate a bunch of money to Goodwill, they give you a blank receipt. They're not trying to value all of those used goods. You also should not try to value all of those used goods unless you really know what they're worth and have a good professional evaluation of their value. We already talked about the ticket prices, and raffle tickets are not deductible. Unrelated business income tax, we don't need to dive into, but just a quick overview is if your charity is doing a whole bunch of business that's unrelated to the charity and is like an actual business, then you might be subject to unrelated business income tax. So even though you otherwise didn't have to pay tax, that might subject you to it. When you're thinking about gaming, bingo, instant bingo, raffles, the games of chance, that kind of stuff, if a player wins $600 or more, they actually need to file a W-2G. So that's something to think about if you have anything at or above $600. One way that a lot of folks avoid it is to make the highest prize $599. So you're just under that amount and you don't have to deal with that form. We talked about raffle tickets. Beth, I know, talked to you about fundraising efforts, about fundraising efforts to help a particular person or family. Actually, she might not have. I think it was different. If you're conducting a fundraiser, often you see fundraisers on GoFundMe or that kind of stuff for particular individuals. Those are not charitable solicitations, even though they seem charitable and you think they're charitable. Those are not charitable solicitations. They don't require registration with our office because it's not for the general public. It's not for the public good. It's for a specific person. But as a result, those contributions to specific individuals are not a charitable contribution or deductible. Those are not deductible. So even if your charity decided to do a fundraiser for a particular individual or participate in that, those funds are not deductible. And so it's important that you can let folks know that, donors know that. Beth talked to you about policies, and I know she's going to talk a bunch more about policies in the next session if you're attending that. So I'm just going to skip right past that. But one quick shout out to help us help you is if you see something wrong, as folks who know what is wrong, know what is right, know what's going on with charities, if you see something, say something. Let us know. Most of the time we find out about things that are going wrong with charities and that there are issues because somebody in the community tells us. So file a complaint. You can do that online. You can also call us up or send it through the mail, but online is the easiest process. You can also file a complaint anonymously. So if you don't want folks to know that it's you filing the complaint, that's okay. You can do it anonymously, but let us know so we can do something about it. And here's our contact information, as well as a link to our new and improved website. I know my contact information is somewhere in this chat, so feel free to find it, abigail.jacobs@ohioattorneygeneral.gov. Feel free to email me with any questions or concerns, but that's all.
Okay, well, thank you, Abby. Beth, I don't know, is there anything else you want to say in conclusion? Oh, look at that. Is there anything else you want to say in conclusion, Beth?
I so wish that we were in person with you all. So thanks for those who stuck with us. Let me ask all of you, any questions arise from the information that we covered? Anything not make sense? Some of the 2915 language about the gambling, raffles, bingo, casino nights, it can be very confusing. It's not the General Assembly's best work. And so just know that if you're engaging in that sort of thing, make sure you're doing it the right way. So I gave you my email, and I think Heather said this is going to be recorded. So if it's of value, pass it on. I hope that Heather will invite me to actually come to Toledo once the world changes and we can do that. Is it necessary for nonprofits to get a vendor license if selling foods, drinks, or other items? Abby, so those would be city issues. The answer could be maybe. There are also some exemptions I know for churches, temples, synagogues on that front. Do you have any insights to offer on that question, Abby?
No. I echo what you say, but it's so specific to where you're located and what those particular rules are, that you'll really need to look at that and see what it says.
Yeah, and there's a great local resource. If you are, I mean, of course, the AG's office, and of course we want you to come back, Beth, of course. They are very responsive. I always say an email's worth an oops when you get pretty far down. So even if it's something you think is a stupid question, you can see from this, the devil is really in the details. So if you want to do something particularly around fundraising, I would strongly suggest you at least just zip off a quick email, get some clarity, and you can save yourself a lot of pain and cost if there's something, like, I mean, we threw a lot at you today. Of course, you're not going to remember all of it. So you can come back to the recording. Yes, it is recorded. And then if you're not familiar with the Small Business Development Center, they normally do not support nonprofits. However, to this point of drinks and other items and sales and things, if you are starting to look at, or you run a social enterprise, and you might want an interpretation on, do I need to be collecting tax on this? Or is there a special license required for this in our municipality or the state or the county? I think they're a great first stop. I'll make sure that when I send out the replay, let me make a note of that. When I send out the replay and the PowerPoints, I will make sure their contact information. If you're not familiar with them, it's a great team embedded inside the Toledo Regional Chamber of Commerce. So sometimes, and as Beth had said, you know, if you're employing and paying people, you're an employer just like everybody else. I mean, I think it is one of the toughest things for nonprofits to get your hands around all these different aspects of staying in compliance legally as a nonprofit. So kudos to all of you for hanging in with us. If you're returning this afternoon, totally different, I mean, we're pivoting totally. God bless Beth, she's coming back. God bless all of you for hanging in there. But I strongly suggest, if you're gonna be like me, go for a walk or something, get up, shake it off. I mean, I know we'll check emails and things, but try not to get too embroiled in the business back in the office, or I guess you're in a lot of your home offices now. Anything else, Abby or Beth, before we sign off?
You know, the one thing I is are up in the Toledo area. I wish that there are not programs like this in other places around the state, and Heather is a real gem, and what's going on there really is making a huge difference. And I so wish that there were Heathers in about 8 other places in Ohio. So there you are part of being a real strategic provider of services to change the world up in Northwest Ohio. So I have enormous respect. Heather, someone just asked, there was indeed a separate registration, and will the link be different for this afternoon?
Yes, so that has officially closed, but if you didn't register and you want to participate, or you want to double check your registration, you can just email me directly at heather@c4npr.org, and we'll get you all set up. Don't worry about that, we'll get you in. One final thing, if you participated with us before, you know we send out a very brief evaluation. This is extra critical this time around that we get your feedback, because the first 2 questions are asking, was the fact that there is no cost for this webinar, this session, did that influence your decision to participate or your ability to participate? And also that it was online, because we serve a lot more counties than just Lucas County, but not everybody can always get to an event. And the reason why that's so important is because if you're not aware, all of these sessions through the end of the year, the online sessions, have been underwritten by the Greater Toledo Community Foundation. So a big thank you to them for funding this, making it possible. That's part of their contribution to the nonprofit community this year. But I really want to understand and get some data around how much the fact that they are online and that you don't have to travel and that you don't have to pay for it, how much did that influence your decision? So I'll be sending out, and of course we want your feedback on the content as always. I think that's it. I think we're good. So everybody have a great lunch. And possibly we'll see you this afternoon. If not, we'll catch you down the road somewhere else. Okay?
Best
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.